Although Isuzu as a brand name didn't appear until 1949, it can trace its origins back to 1916, when the Tokyo Gas and Electric Utility Company teamed up with Ishikawajima Shipbuilding and Engineering to start assembling Wolseley cars in Japan, making the Wolseley Model 15 horsepower the first car manufactured in Japan, followed shortly thereafter by the first commercial truck, a Wolseley 1.5-ton unit, powered by a 3.1-liter inline-4 with 26 horsepower. Production numbers were relatively small, with fewer than 1,000 vehicles built over their first decade. After the Great Kanto earthquake, the need for commercial trucks grew considerably, leading to the development of the early Sumida trucks and buses, still based around Wolseley trucks. In 1929, Ishikawajima Automotive Works was spun off as its own entity, but in 1931, a standard truck design was laid out by National Committee, developed so they could be used as road vehicles and railroad vehicles, as the later Sumida and Chiyoda trucks. And although the company would continue on as an imperial manufacturing entity, regular mergers and separations, as were needed, meant regular name changes. Most translated to nothing more than the Automobile Industry Company, or the Tokyo Automobile Industry Company, and after the breakaway from Hino Heavy Industries, the Diesel Automobile Industry Company, which would be producing armored transport vehicles during the war, with commercial truck production returning after the war, specifically the TX series, or BX in bus form. But with post-war industrialization, it was renamed Isuzu, after the river of the same name, a shrine reference meaning 50 bells. Car production would soon return, once again building a British car under license, this time around the Hillman Minx. And at the end of 1959, they would introduce a cab-over truck design, called the Elf, that would be offered in a wide variety of configurations, initially with a 1.5-liter gas engine that was soon joined by a 2-liter diesel. In 1961, they introduced their first in-house car design, the Bel L, with the L representing the Roman numeral for 50, or, again, 50 bells. It was 176 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase, making it rather large for a Japanese car of the period. It could be had with either a 1.5 or 2-liter gas engine, or a 2-liter diesel, making it Japan's first diesel car. It would be joined in 1963 by the smaller and more popular Bellette, or Little Bell, that would be offered in a variety of body styles, including a Wasp pickup version, and sporty GT and GTR versions, more than 170,000 sold over its 10-year run. It was also about this time that Isuzu introduced the BU bus with its rear underfloor engine, followed by a larger cab-over truck in 1966 as the TY series. The lineup would get updated, including a new cute ute called the Unicab. The Florian, or 117 sedan, replaced the Bel L, of which there was also a new GT Coupe variant called the 117 Coupe. But Isuzu's commercial-focused lineup didn't exactly help it succeed in Japan's small car-focused market, which encouraged them to begin looking for a partner, and led to short-lived partnerships with Fuji Heavy Industries, Mitsubishi, Nissan, and in 1971, General Motors, by which point they were making a tour bus based on the Elf and called the Journey, and the TY trucks would be replaced by the TR Forward. In 1972, a pickup version of the Florian was introduced to replace the Wasp, called the Faster, although it would see greater sales through the GM network, including being sold as the Chevrolet Light Utility Vehicle, or LUV for short. And it wouldn't be long until commercial Isuzu trucks found their way into the GMC commercial truck lineup. The Bellette was replaced in 1974 by the Gemini, essentially Isuzu's version of the Opel Kadett C, which had been developed as part of a joint venture of GM's various subsidiaries as the GM T-Car architecture, and would be sold in the U.S. as a Buick, just as the previous Kadett had been. The cab-over commercial Elf and Forward trucks would be updated in 1975, and in the case of the latter, would include up to a 5.4-liter diesel straight-six. Starting in 1978, the Faster and its variants would become available with four-wheel drive, with the second-generation versions arriving in 1980, which would be sold in the U.S. as both the Chevy Love and as the Isuzu Pup, short for pickup, also sold in other markets as the Rodeo. About the same time, the conventional cab commercial trucks would go away after 50 years, to be replaced by a version of the GM Top Kick, sold as the Isuzu H-Series. The long-running BU bus would be replaced by the more common C bus, and Isuzu would introduce the Fargo van. The 117 Coupe would be replaced in 1981 by the Piazza, a car that sold in the U.S. as the Impulse. The same time they introduced the Trooper, which would be viewed as the poor man's Range Rover, and see success in many markets. In the U.S., the Gemini would transition from the Buick Opel to the Isuzu iMark, as Isuzu tried to develop its own identity here. Perhaps a bit late, but it found a niche with small diesels.
Isuzu! That's okay, kid. I can't say Chevrolet.
Outside the U.S., they started offering their own version of the GM J-body car, typically as the Oscar, somehow appearing even more generic than even the Cavalier. In 1984, the C-Bus would be replaced by the Cubit bus, and shortly thereafter, the cab-over Elf and Forward would once again be revised. The GM T-body would be replaced by the R-body in 1985, which Isuzu led the development of. Not only would it be the new Gemini and iMark, but was also the Spectrum sold by Chevrolet and Geo. The Isuzu pickup would be redesigned in 1988, continuing on with both the Faster and Rodeo names, and just as the Isuzu pickup in the U.S. And although the Love continued on in some markets, it had previously been replaced in the U.S. by GM's own S10. There were also new SUV variants of the Isuzu truck, also sold as the Rodeo, and as the short-wheelbase Amigo, as well as under other names. Isuzu would revise their car lineup for the 90s that would include an updated Gemini and Piazza, or Stylus and Impulse in the U.S., now with Lotus tuned suspension, which was also sold as the Geo Storm, while the new Oscar was simply a rebadged Subaru Legacy. And a year later, there would be a new Trooper, moving it up market. And for those markets it priced out of, there would be a new Panther truck-based wagon. But 1993 would be the year that Isuzu decided to give up on cars in the U.S. and focus on SUVs. Outside the U.S., car sales would carry on through an agreement with Honda. The new Oscar was a rebadged Accord, while Honda got a Rodeo as the passport. But it was the cab-over trucks that was keeping the company going. A new Elf in 93, a new Forward in 94, and a new Fargo in 95, which was now just a rebadged Nissan, as was the soon-to-follow, smaller Fargo Philly. In 1994, they also introduced a heavy-duty cab-over truck as the Giga, followed in 1996 by a heavy-duty tour bus as the Gala. And the focus on SUVs seemed to be working, as Isuzu would have its best year in the U.S. in 1996, when they replaced their in-house pickup with a version of Chevy's S10, called the Ombre, apparently giving them the courage to experiment with an advanced small two-door crossover, called the Vehicross, but it turned out to be too radical for most buyers. In 2000, they would introduce a new line of city bus, the Erga, and shortly thereafter, the rebadged vehicles from Honda and Nissan would be discontinued. But they would get some new products of their own. First was the new Axiom SUV, a vehicle that seems pretty mild by today's standards, but when it was released in 2002, the look was considered quite radical, and it only lasted a few years. More importantly, however, was a new pickup, the D-Max, which we didn't get in the U.S. Instead, we got a rebadged version of the GM truck sold as the I-Series. Over the next few years, their SUVs would be phased out, to be replaced by a similar GM SUV, as the Ascender. But focus was shifting back to light commercial vehicles. Although by this point, the Journey and Gala buses were being built by Hino. There was a new Elf in 2006, and a new Forward in 2007. 2009 would start to see the end of the long partnership with GM, meaning Isuzu's commercial trucks were no longer being sold as GMCs, and Isuzu would no longer be offering non-commercial vehicles in the U.S., although the D-Max would continue in other markets. At the same time, Isuzu acquired UD Truck from Volvo, previously known as Nissan Diesel. In 2011, they introduced the Reach walk-through van, sharing its general architecture with the Elf. Then, the second-generation Giga would arrive in 2015. In 2019, Isuzu introduced a new D-Max small pickup in a joint venture with Mazda, as well as the small Traga box truck. And in 2021, they entered a joint venture to develop electric and fuel cell commercial vehicles. An updated D-Max and new versions of the Elf, Forward, and Giga were all introduced in 2023, meaning that Isuzu is still chugging along. And while it may never have been a hugely popular car brand, it has managed to outlast many other popular brands with a continued focus on commercial trucks. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.